Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paula Hance. I'm a procurement analyst in the General Supplies and Services Mass Contracting Division, and I am very pleased today to present to you an overview of our transition to the new GSAR Economic Price Adjustment Clause 552238120. I know you all have been long awaiting this amazing topic. So today, the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the change from our traditional IFSS 969 and 5522160 clauses to our new one-stop shop EPA clause. We're going to go over the triggering events that require you to take action. We're going to go over the process that you undergo to transition to the new EPA methods, which includes our three mechanisms. There's actually four, but the last one is automatically incorporated into your contract, and we'll talk about that later. But we've got mechanism one, fixed escalation, mechanism two, market index or other basis, and mechanism three, EPAs based on established pricing. We will also go over post-incorporation actions, give you some tips and tricks, and then give you a list of resources that can help you navigate through this process to transition to the new EPA clause and establish the new EPA methods, including mechanisms for your mass contracts. So on to the next slide, if I can get there. There we go. So a little bit of background. What has changed? So GSAR Clause 552238120 was incorporated into the mass solicitation under Mass Refresh 29, which occurred on August 28th of 2025. This removed our traditional EPA clauses IFSS 969 and GSAR 5522160 and replaced it with one single clause, GSAR 552238120, Economic Price Adjustment. Now, what's different about this clause? Well, this new clause allows for the contracting officer and the contractor to agree upon the method for future price adjustments. The old clauses provided the methods, including mechanisms for future adjustments. So with IFSS 969, you would have a fixed escalation, or you could do increase based upon a market index. And you would do those, there were set timeframes, limitations, etc. for those adjustments. This clause just shows, I'll just go to the clause for you guys so you can see it in all its glory. If I can get my screen to work there. Okay, here we go. So I'm just going to take you to the clause real quick. So it basically says that the CO and contractor will establish a method for future price adjustments. And we actually go to the GSAM 538-270-4, where it addresses the various mechanisms for future adjustments. So that's a major change with this clause. And now that triggers the fact that we need to incorporate our method and mechanism once we accept the refresh to incorporate GSAR 552238120. And now to the next one, a little bit more. Offers submitted prior to refresh 29 will need to be updated during offer evaluation to incorporate and propose your EPA method and mechanism. Mass offers submitted after refresh 29 will be required to submit it where they originally proposed their new method and mechanism in accordance with 552238120. For existing contracts, we've got a two-part process. First, you need to accept refresh 29, which will incorporate the new clause 552238120. As soon as that's done, at that point, we will need to establish when a triggering offense occurs, the new EPA method and mechanism. If no triggering event occurs, then you don't need to do anything yet. And we will get to what those triggering events are very soon. So the revised terms and conditions mod is conducted to incorporate the new method and mechanism. The contractor will submit a modification, revised terms and conditions modification, to incorporate their new method, and mechanism. The clause is already incorporated into your contract by accepting refresh 29, but you do have to do the mod to incorporate the method and mechanism for future adjustments. This revised terms and conditions mod does need to occur prior to a triggering event. So let's go over the triggering events. Number one, if you're planning to submit an EPA modification request, well, 55221.670 and IFSS 969 no longer exist. So before we do that EPA request, we've got to incorporate our new EPA method and mechanism. So prior to submission of your EPA, you will need to submit that EPA or the terms and conditions mod to incorporate your new method and mechanism. If you have an addition mod coming up, so add products, add labor categories, add SINs, you will need to submit your modification to incorporate your new method and mechanism. If you've got an option coming up, prior to exercise of the option, we've got to get our EPA method and mechanism incorporated because again, IFSS 969, 55221.670 are gone. And it does require a separate revised terms and conditions mod because as we know, an option mod just extends the terms of the contract and that's the purpose of the option mod. So it has to be done separately. Number four, if a contractor wants to take a proactive approach, they can simply, once they accept refresh 29, submit their mod to incorporate their method and mechanism. That way, if they have one of these triggering events come up, they can just have it already completed and don't have to worry about it anymore. So there are some benefits to just voluntarily submitting that mod proactively. There may be some time between accepting refresh 29 and submitting your revised terms and conditions. Remember that submission is required before the triggering events occur once you accept refresh 29. So just remember that. Sometimes if you have like a service contract with a fixed escalation rate and you don't do that many changes throughout the life of the contract, then you might be submitting your mod prior to the option mod. Whereas someone who has a products contracts and they're changing their products all the time, adding, doing EPAs, they might need to do it kind of once they accept the refresh because they probably have a mod right under their bucket right now that they're trying to work on. So those are some things that you need to think about when you're considering when you need to submit this revised terms and conditions modification. So let's just go over the process. For existing contracts, again, upon a triggering event, you have to submit the revised terms and conditions mod. So step one, formulate your proposed EPA method. Make sure to choose a mechanism, so there's 3 different mechanisms that we're going to go over, that aligns with your commercial practices. It may be very similar to what you have right now. Fixed escalation, market index, established pricing, those are all very similar to our legacy clauses. So it might be very similar to what you already have. Step 2, gather and submit your required documentation through remod, and we will show you what you need to submit. Step 3, make sure to work with your contracting officer, contract specialist to finalize your modification request and ensure everything is completed. So let's take a deep dive into the EPA method. So the method includes both the mechanisms and the limitations, so frequency, timing, and etc. There are 3 mechanisms permitted under 538.2704, and we have a 4th that's automatically incorporated into your contract. So we've got your fixed escalation, which must occur on the anniversary date of contract award and is on an annual basis. There is a note in the solicitation clause that specifically states that there is a limitation on this particular mechanism, and that is annual on anniversary date of contract award. 2, market index or other basis. This is where you base your future adjustments on an objective market indicator. Something like the employment cost index would be an example of that. 3rd, we've got established pricing. So future adjustments are based upon change in commercial price list or a commercial catalog or some other standard market pricing that is regularly maintained. The 4th is extraordinary market conditions. And that again is going to be incorporated into all contracts. And it is the 4th way by which a contractor can request an economic price adjustment. Things like COVID, natural disasters might be a reason to utilize that particular mechanism. It should be rare. Each mechanism has unique characteristics, and we're going to go over those. And we're going to go over the applications, where it might fit best, and then what are the requirements. I did want to just take you over real quick to this little handy dandy page that I really like. And it kind of gives you an overview of the clause, as well as kind of what you need to do, what the triggering events are, and then the method and the mechanisms that are available for you. So I just thought you guys might want to look at this little page, and when you get the slide deck, because you will get a copy of the slide deck, you can click on it and just take a gander at this little page here that gives you some overview of the EPA methods. So now we're going to go on to our next slide. So let's take a deep dive into these various mechanisms. So first, we've got our fixed escalations. This is like the old legacy IFSS 969B1. This scenario is often used for services, labor category type contracts where there's a predictable annual cost increase, and generally that aligns with the market index data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, such as the Employment Cost Index. With this, the timing is going to apply annually on the anniversary date of contract award. There's no other way to do this. That is the limitation. It is preset for you. Generally, when you're submitting your documents and providing the rationale for the escalation rate, you can use a 5-year average of the employment cost index, table 5, not seasonally adjusted, to come up with your 5-year average. You're going to look for a series that is very similar to what you offer. So if you're doing professional services, you want to find a series that is related to professional services. And I'll show you that chart a little bit later, or that site a little later, just so you can see what I'm talking about. This fixed escalation is compatible with our FCP and EMOD frameworks. So when you look at your Services Plus file in FCP or your service and training template, you will see that it allows for out-year pricing. So this method aligns with those people that are using that Services Plus file and the services and training file if they're not in FCP. There is not an out-year pricing mechanism for products. And we will go through a little bit why this might not be a good idea for product offerings when it comes to fixed escalation on a future slide. With fixed escalation, there are some definite benefits, such as the evaluation is done at initial award for the entire period, and then at each option, we reevaluate. There's no mod required, so the pricing just annually escalates without a modification submitted. So it is very, as far as administrative burden, it is much less when you're dealing with something like that. Go to the next slide. So when you are a new offer, we actually have a pricing terms attachment that we have you complete. And this pricing terms attachment is where you're going to propose your fixed escalation rate, where you're going to address your rationale, and then explain how this aligns with your commercial practice. You do need to make sure you submit your pricing terms attachment. And I believe there's also a separate attachment that you have to upload under this document category for EPA. So you can just make sure it aligns with whatever you submit for the EPA document aligns with your pricing terms attachment. You're also obviously going to submit your product file, your Services Plus file. If you're doing a fixed escalation rate, it's actually only the Services Plus file because of the fact that the product file doesn't allow for out-year pricing. Important notes, fixed escalations must be applied only on the anniversary date of contract award. So if you're going to try to do something different, you can't. Just keep that in mind when you're looking at these different methods and mechanisms to incorporate your EPA. This is just an example of a proposal language that you could use to provide your proposal for the escalation and your rationale for why you want to utilize this method. If you have a current contract You're going to submit your cover letter, first of all. And the cover letter is very, very, very useful because it kind of gives you a step-by-step approach. I'm just going to show it to you right now so you can see it. Um, so it gives you kind of a step-by-step approach for what you need to do. So here's what your current method is. And then here's what you're proposing. It tells you everything that you need to do. It gives you a little guidance on what you need to do to provide your rationale. And it's in a template format, so it's very easy to complete. And it also just kind of gives you the attachments that you need to remember to include. So definitely recommend utilizing this to the maximum extent possible because this gives you exactly what you need as far as trying to figure out how to submit this, what documents are required, etc. I also want to encourage you to utilize where did it go? The handy dandy little mass modification. Oops, that's probably the wrong one. Yes, it is. Let me go back. So we've got our little mass modification guide. And if you go to the table of contents, I'm going to go down to the revised terms and conditions implementation of EPA method mechanism in accordance with GSAR 552-238120. That is a mouthful. It will give you an outline of exactly what you need to do. It will give you even information on what you need to do if you're in FCP. So I highly encourage you to utilize this little handy dandy desk guide to the maximum extent possible when you're submitting your EPA method and mechanism modification. This is going to be really helpful for both you and your contracting officer as well. Make sure that you properly complete the document. So you want to put the out your pricing for the life of the contract if you're updating your Services Plus file. You may not need to do anything in FCP. If your product file or Services Plus file are not changing, you do not need to submit the change action in FCP. The only time you would need to submit a change action is when you're proposing a different fixed escalation, in which case you would need to submit a services change action, and then in EMOD, a combined services descriptive change and revised terms and conditions modification. And we have a little handy dandy chart further along that kind of shows you what to do in those cases. Remember also, your current pricing that's awarded right now should not be changed. This is for future. So your pricing will escalate on the anniversary date of contract award by this newly established rate or that we have incorporated into the contract. So reminder, no mod required for future escalations. And then the CO is going to reevaluate it at option time. So the next one is market index or other basis. So in this case, again, you've got an objective basis, the benchmark. Usually it's something like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, although this does allow for you to propose another basis. But generally speaking, we use market index. Again, this is a really good fit for labor categories or services tied to specific market indicators. If you've got a lot of volatility, like in the products you're offering, or if you have a wide variety of products, a market index would not be what I would utilize. I would use, this is more for established, established series, set with specific market indicators that align with whatever you are offering, and that there's not wide variation as far as the movement of your products or services. This is trusted because it reflects real world cost movements over time. It's flexible, so there is the possibility for doing it annually, semi-annually, or quarterly, depending on when that market index is updated. I tend to recommend annual because if you look at like the quarterly adjustments, oftentimes with these indexes, they do not change enough to warrant the whole process of submitting an EPA, and it is a somewhat timely process. So it might be worth doing it annually if you're able to do that. So that's a consideration to take into account. It should align with your commercial practices, just like all the other mechanisms. Again, the limitations, timing aligns with how the index updates occur. However, oftentimes we would recommend an annual increase just because of the change is just not sufficient enough to warrant the administrative burden of submitting a mod every quarter to increase your pricing. Some of the unique requirements, so you do need to identify a specific index or basis, so series ID, title, occupation, industry, as well as timing. So if you're going to that Bureau of Labor Statistics sites, that's where you would address that. Price changes occur through a modification request. Each EPA request must include the most current index and something to show that you're requesting your adjustment in accordance with the method that you agreed upon with your contracting officer. And this might be a good time to just take you to this BLS page. So here's where we have the BLS page. And if you're wanting to get an employment cost index and you're wanting to get all that information that you need, I'm going to go to employment cost index. There's a one screen search that you can use. So I'm going to go to that and I'm going to pull this up and I'm going to just say, so private industry would be what you always would choose. It's always total compensation because as we all know, our rates must be fully burdened. And then I'm going to go into professional, scientific, and technical services and all workers. And then I'm going to do a not seasonally adjusted. We always want not seasonally adjusted. And then let's see. Got to make sure I got everything right. Industry, data type. So this is very different from what I'm used to. I think I'm gonna select, yep, I did. I selected the wrong thing. Hold on, let me go back. So, gonna try this again here. Employment cost index. Looking for the employment cost index. Sorry, everybody. Employment cost index. There we go. They moved it on me. Okay, let's try this again. So I'm gonna go to the one screen search. And I'm gonna go to private industry, total compensation. I'm gonna be in the professional, scientific, and technical services, all occupations. And then I'm gonna do the 12-month percentage change because I wanna do my changes annually. Add that to my selection. I'm gonna get data. And here's all the information you need. Here's a series ID, title, ownership, component, industry. So this is what you would submit as your support right here. And then usually there, again, it's released quarterly. So let's say you came in, you established this in Q2 of 2024, that's you'd have 3.8 would be available. And then you come in the next year at Q3 2025, and you would have Q2 available. So that would be how much your increase would be, 3.2%. So it just depends on of course, it obviously depends on the series, but these kind of have some pretty wide variations in how much they increase year over year. But these are just gives you a little bit of information on how that works. So that's a quick run through, but that is how you can find the employment cost index information if that is what you are going to use as your basis. So for new offers, again, you're going to complete that pricing terms attachment where you're going to propose your index, any timing, frequency, and any kind of limitations that you're proposing. Remember that it must align with your commercial practices. When you submit your document, again, you get your pricing terms attachment, your product file, or your services plus file. An important note, the pros index must align with your commercial practices. And this is just another example of kind of the language that you might use when you're proposing that index. If you're doing a modification, again, you'll submit your cover letter and it goes through everything for you. So make sure you follow that cover letter and also look at that desk guide. Ensure that the index proposed aligns with the products or services you're offering. So if you're offering hammers, then you're not going to propose a services code. under professional and technical services. That doesn't make sense. So make sure that it aligns with whatever you're offering. Include your explanation for why you chose that index. Again, we recommend annual, but it's up to you what you propose. You will receive for all of these, no matter whether or not you negotiate with your contracting officer, you will receive a final proposal revision, and you will need to complete that, and do complete it quickly, because that will get your EPA method and mechanism mod through the chain quicker, and so that you can move on to your other work that you are doing. You'll receive that, you'll fill it out, you'll complete it, and then that will put a little bow on your EPA terms and conditions modification, and you can move forward. We did do some helpful links, which that ECI index search that I just showed earlier that I couldn't find, it's right here linked for you. So had I just waited for the slide, I would have had a much easier time. Darn it. And then for future modifications, just remember that each with market index, you do have to submit a mod, which each request. Make sure when you submit it that aligns with whatever you agreed upon with your contracting officer, and make sure to submit the most current index information when you submit your modification. So if you said you were going to submit this annually and you submit it 3 months later, that is not in line with what you all agreed upon. So make sure that you have documented what you agreed upon, and that you follow that method, what you've agreed upon in your future adjustment requests. Next slide. So our third mechanism, and this one is very, very common for our product contracts, and that is established pricing. So in this case, a contractor has established some sort of established commercial price list where they manage the changes in their pricing. It's tied to your own pricing. The adjustments occur when you update your commercial price list, which often occurs when you have increases from your suppliers. You want to ensure that your government pricing reflects true commercial practice. Some unique requirements. The established pricing document must be publicly available upon request or must be published. It must not be standalone, so it's not created just solely for this contract. The pricing document becomes a part of the contract and serves as a reference for future requests. So my pricing, my CPL is dated 4/25/26. Then when I get my EPA, it should be based upon a new CPL dated 6/25/26, something. So, and I would base the increase on how much it's increased since my last established pricing change incorporated into that contract. Some key limitations: it must reflect actual commercial practice. Each update requires a current data copy of your price list or catalog. You do have to submit a modification with each request. When addressing the limitations, because you do have to propose limitations or just say we propose none, you need to address the rationale as to why, and consider how often does my pricing change commercially. And also, how often are my different suppliers coming in with their increases? Because you don't want to bind yourself by an annual increase when you've got price increases coming from your suppliers at different times during the year. This again aligns with contractors who have established pricing, and a lot of times this is our product contractors. So when you have a new offer, make sure to submit your pricing terms attachment, and you do need a dated, make sure it's dated, commercial price list, catalog, or established pricing document. You need to propose your frequency, timing, and ceiling limitations, or propose no limitations, and make sure to explain why you're proposing these limitations, and address how this aligns with your commercial practice. All required documentation must be submitted. So your pricing terms attachment, everything that's submitted that you would regularly submit with your offer, and then your product file and your services plus file. We gave some language that you can use to submit your proposal. So that's just language that you can use, making sure that it aligns with your particular request. So if you have a modification, you're going to submit that cover letter. And again, the cover letter is very detailed, and I'm going to keep pointing you to that because that will guide you in the way that you need to go. And it will reduce the burden on both you and your CO and CS. So you won't have to do all that back and forth and back and forth. So make sure you're looking at that cover letter and following that process. The pricing document, the established pricing document should not be created solely for the purpose of this GSA contract. You do need to, the CO will need to verify that you have established pricing and that's regularly maintained. And then you will again get an FPR letter. Make sure to complete that as soon as possible, get that turned around, make sure it's accurate before you sign off on it. And each new price mod will require a new dated commercial price list, as well as the submission of a modification. So just remember that. Changes should be in line with your commercial price changes that your established pricing document changes. And if it's not, then you would need to provide the rationale for why. Okay, so submission of your modification. What a fun topic. So if you are not an FCP, then obviously you would just submit your revised terms and conditions modification. The currently awarded pricing on this revised terms and conditions mod, I want to keep saying this, should not be changing. What is changing is your method and mechanism for future price adjustments. We're incorporating that new method and mechanism. If you are in FCP, there are some things that you need to consider. So you should not require a change to your PF, but if you do, please let your contracting officer know, because we will address that kind of on a case-by-case basis. But your services plus file may change if you have a fixed escalation rate, or if you're going from a market index where you didn't have out your pricing to a fixed escalation rate. In these instances, you will have to do a combined services change action in FCP, and then a revised terms and conditions mod, plus service descriptive change, E-mod, to get the process to work. If you have a product file and a services plus file and you don't have any changes to your product file, then you can do this all under that one mod. So you'll do a services change action in FCP. You'll do a, in E-mod, you'll do a services descriptive change, a revised terms and conditions modification, and you can address everything under that mod. You'll upload your currently awarded product file. Your services plus file will go through FCP, and it will be automatically incorporated into that mod. So you won't need to submit like a separate attachment for that. So if no changes are required, everything can be done outside the system. So you would just submit your revised terms and conditions mod. You would upload your currently awarded PF, product file, or services plus file, which you can download from FCP. And I believe the mod desk guide tells you how to do that. So just make sure you're looking at that. And it should be a very simple process if you're not making any changes to the actual templates. This is just a little process flow charts if you like to see flow charts for what you need to do. So you've got this triggering event. You got to require that TNC mod prior to that triggering event. If you're updating the FCP, then you would have, or the product file, then you would have to do a change action in FCP. However, again, there should be very few, the changes should be very rare when it comes to the product file. So contact your CO in that case. No, then you would just download your current product file or your Services Plus file from FCP. You submit your revised terms and conditions attachments, or sorry, your revised terms and conditions modification with your cover letter and your current PF or SPF, and then you would process the mod. Previously, prior to October 27th, you had to submit a pricing terms attachment as a part of the modification process. That is no longer required. Yay. Makes it easier for everybody. So all you'll need to do is that cover letter, the your pricing files, and then your commercial price list or whatever supporting documentation that you're required based upon the outlined in the modification guide and in your cover letter. And then this is kind of the services chart, the flow chart for that. I'm not going to go into the weeds on this one, but it's just the same thing as we talked about previously, but the steps in a chart format. And if you don't like those, then we've got this little table here for you that gives you an overview of what to do in each scenario. So, post-incorporation actions. So once you've incorporated that EPA method and mechanism, that's your path forward for future adjustments. Monitoring your pricing to make sure that it's consistent with your method. Price increases due to SCLS wage determination, that's a separate process. That's under 52-22243, which after refresh 30 will be deviation 2025. So you'll want to look at that November 2025. So you want to look at that deviation because we're incorporating the RFO changes under refresh 30. That should not affect this modification, by the way. Refresh 30 is coming out within the next week or so, but it should not affect how you do this mod. Retain all supporting documentation for your approved method. Coordinate early with your COs. If you're going to be thinking, man, I'm going to be submitting this EPA mod soon or this ad mod soon, well, then you probably need to consider get this revised terms and conditions mod in as soon as possible. So once that EPA terms and conditions modification has been done, you will never reference those old clauses ever again because they are gone, just gone. And now we reference 552-238-120 for our future adjustments. Tips for a smooth transition. Start early. If you know you've got a modification coming up that's one of those triggering events, get to work on this thing early. Keep it consistent. Align with your commercial practices. That might be very similar to what you already have. When you submit your document, don't say you want it to be the exact same as what the previous clauses required if you don't want any restrictions, because the previous clauses had specific limitations set up. There were timing limitations, frequency limitations, and ceiling limits. So if you say, I want the exact same thing as I had before under 552216670, then you're going to hold yourself to 3 increase annually, ceiling increase of whatever the 10%, 5%, etc. You really don't, if you don't want to do that, then that's not what you're actually proposing. So make sure that what you're proposing is actually what you want and is in line with your commercial practices. Be transparent, provide clear rationale and documentation for this proposed EPA method and mechanism. Ensure that your attachments and pricing match your contract record. That's much easier in FCP because it's done for you and you can just download it from that system if you don't need to make any changes. Stay informed. Review the latest mass modification guidance for process updates. We update that mass modification guide with almost every refresh. And we have put a lot of time and effort into making this process as smooth as possible for you and for your COs. So please make sure to read that mod guide. And every time a solicitation update occurs, make sure to download it don't save it to your desktop because there's going to be changes. Make sure you're using the most current version. If you guys are using the refresh 28 version of the mass mod guide, guess what? The EPA information won't be there. So make sure you're using the most current version. And here are some lovely dovely little resources that you can use. Like I said, this is going to be your favorite page right here. So you got your handy dandy little mass modification guide, which is very detailed in what it requires. And you're going to go just down to this little EPA method and mechanism modification here. And you can also go to this handy dandy little guide for ads, for future price adjustments, And if you're an FCP, make sure to use that catalog resources page that's available for you because it has a wealth of information and just some really good outlines of like what you need to do in what scenarios. It's got some really great infographics that the CMO team, the catalog management office team has worked to create for all of us when it comes to how we do our actions in FCP. So make sure to be referring to that. Make sure to refer to that cover letter template right over here, which gives you explicit instructions for what you need to do. Use GSAM 538-2704 as your guide. I know this is a little weird because we were so used to everything being addressed in those two clauses, IFSS 969 and 552-1670. Now your EPA mechanisms are in GSAM 538.270-4, and it gives you the three methods, and then that last one, adjustments based upon unforeseeable significant changes in market conditions, that's available for all contracts where that need comes to fruition. It does allow for the solicitation owner to establish specific restrictions, ceiling percentage limits, etc., in the event that it needs to, and specific instructions. So one instruction that we did add was that you can only submit for fixed escalation. That fixed escalation can only be done annually on the anniversary date of contract award. So there is that limitation that's preset by the solicitation for fixed escalation. Make sure again that when you submit future adjustments, they align with the method and the mechanism that you all agreed upon when you did your revised terms and conditions mod. It's a separate modification, so it should be really easy to refer back to as a guide. And then we also have this little handy dandy web page here that our training team works so hard on that kind of gives you an outline of what you need to do. It's just a very simple outline. And we also have some tables for you that, we've got the BLS ECI tables, which is what you'll often use, which people often use for the market index or fixed escalation. Again, you propose it, but that's just something that is often used. The vendor support center gives you a handy dandy little list of all the refreshes that have occurred. And when you select this thing here, it gives you the solicitation document, the base solicitation document for refresh 29. So this page is pretty cool. And there's also some training vendors on how to use things. And we've also got the mass solicitation refresh 29 updates and language and notes. So hopefully that's on sam.gov. So hopefully this little overview today has provided you some valuable information for how this EPA change under Mass Refresh 29 impacts your contracts and the steps that you need to take to incorporate the EPA method and mechanism to address future price adjustments based upon those triggering events that we outlined. And that is the end of my presentation today. Matt, did you want to answer any questions or?
Hey, Paula. I think that we handled pretty much, excuse me, pretty much all the questions. So, like I said, we'll also take those and we'll put a written answer to each question and provide it in the interact notice. But yeah, as of right now, we're pretty set. A lot of positive feedback, Paula. Really appreciate it.
Awesome.
So yeah, with that said, we're gonna wrap up the session today. Like I said in the beginning of the call, we're gonna make this recording available with Paula's slide deck and the Q&A document that I just referenced. So you can look out for an interact notice within the next week or so, probably just after the holiday. And we really appreciate you guys coming out today to join our mass office hours. Thank you.
Thank you.